This story is titled, My Fiancée Pretended I Didn't Exist for a Week Until I Asked My Bro for Help and Her Scheme Failed Instantly. Now she realizes what she lost and is begging for forgiveness. Hey Reddit, my name is Thomas, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a network engineer and make decent money. Not mega rich by any means, but I was comfortable before I met Natalie. I've been lurking on various forums for a while now, but this is my first time actually posting about something this personal. I'm using a throwaway account for obvious reasons, and I really need to get this off my chest. This story might be long, so buckle up for what turned out to be the most eye-opening week of my marriage. Let me tell you about Natalie. She's 31 years old, and I met her 4 years ago at my buddy Eric's BBQ. At the time, she worked as a social media consultant, making around $30,000 on a good year. But honestly, she looked like she had stepped straight out of a magazine. Way out of my league, or so I thought at the time. I couldn't believe someone like her would be interested in someone like me. Growing up, my parents had always taught me the value of saving money and living within my means. Before Natalie came into my life, I had a decent apartment that suited my needs perfectly, a reliable Toyota that never gave me trouble, and solid savings that I was proud of. Life was simple, but genuinely good. I felt secure and content with what I had built for myself. After 8 months of dating, we decided to get married. The ceremony alone cost me nearly $40,000, a number that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. Her parents had promised to help contribute to the wedding expenses, but when the time came, they contributed exactly $0. That should have been red flag number 1, but I was so caught up in the excitement of marrying the woman of my dreams that I completely ignored the warning signs. I ended up clearing out most of my carefully accumulated savings to pay for what Natalie called her dream wedding. Every time I thought we had finalized the budget, she kept adding more must-haves to the list. The $5,000 dress that she absolutely had to have. Exotic flowers that cost a fortune and died the very next day after the ceremony. The works. Everything had to be perfect and expensive. Red flag number 2 came during our honeymoon in the Bahamas, when Natalie managed to max out 2 of my credit cards on shopping sprees and spa treatments. When I expressed my concern about the mounting debt, she just shrugged it off with a casual, "We're married now. What's yours is mine." It's funny how that principle never seemed to work in reverse. Her minimal income never became ours in the same way. 3 years later, our lifestyle had completely transformed to accommodate Natalie's ever-increasing expectations. We had moved from my comfortable apartment to a house in an upscale neighborhood that stretched my budget to the absolute breaking point. The monthly mortgage payments were almost double what I had been paying in rent, but Natalie insisted we needed to live up to our potential and project success. She drove a leased Audi Q5 that cost more per month than most people spend on groceries, while I continued driving my reliable old Toyota. Our closets told the story of our relationship better than I ever could with words. Hers was overflowing with designer labels, shoes still sitting in their original boxes with tags attached, and handbags that cost more than my monthly car payment. Meanwhile, mine contained a modest collection of basics that I'd picked up from outlet stores whenever I absolutely needed something new. The financial strain was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. But whenever I brought up our spending habits, Natalie would turn it into an argument about how I didn't appreciate her or want her to be happy. I found myself working longer hours just to keep up with the lifestyle she had created for us, while she seemed oblivious to the mounting pressure I was under. The story I'm about to tell you started last Tuesday evening, after what should have been a perfectly normal dinner. There was nothing particularly special about the meal, just some pasta that I had picked up on my way home after pulling a 12-hour shift dealing with a major server crash at work. I was exhausted, but I thought we were having a pleasant enough evening together. We sat at the kitchen table eating and making small talk about our respective days. Then, completely out of nowhere, Natalie suddenly stood up from the table, put her plate in the sink with more force than necessary, and slammed the bedroom door shut behind her. That was it. No explanation, no argument, no indication of what I had supposedly done wrong. Just sudden, complete silence that would mark the beginning of 7 days of psychological warfare that I never saw coming. This wasn't the typical, "I'm mad, but I'll get over it" kind of silence that couples sometimes experience after a disagreement. This was something far more calculated and deliberate, a form of psychological warfare designed to make me squirm. Every good morning I offered was met with her literally turning her back to me and walking away. Every question I asked was answered with nothing but the sound of her footsteps as she left the room. It was as if I had suddenly become invisible in my own home. Desperate to understand what was happening, I decided to do some investigating on my own. I checked her social media accounts, thinking maybe there would be some clue about her mood or what had triggered this sudden change in behavior. What I found only made the situation more confusing and infuriating. She was still posting happy selfies with captions about living my best life, as if nothing was wrong at all. To the outside world, she appeared to be the same cheerful, content person she always presented herself as online. I called her friend Melissa, hoping to get some insight into what might be going through Natalie's mind. When I explained the situation, Melissa just said that Natalie seemed perfectly fine when they had talked earlier that day. This only added to my confusion. How could she be acting completely normal with her friends while treating me like I was carrying some kind of contagious disease? I even reached out to her mother, swallowing my pride and admitting that something was seriously wrong in our marriage. Her mom just responded with this knowing tone that made my blood boil, saying, "You know how she gets sometimes?" As if this behavior was just a normal quirk that I should have learned to accept by now. The casual way she dismissed the situation made me realize that this pattern of behavior wasn't new. I was just the latest person to experience it. That's when it finally hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about communication or working through some misunderstanding between us. This was about control, pure and simple. She wanted me to squirm, to rack my brain trying to figure out what I had supposedly done wrong this time. Was it because I had worked late and missed dinner the previous week? Maybe I hadn't complimented the new $400 throw pillows she had bought without consulting me? With Natalie, it could literally be anything, and that uncertainty was exactly what she was counting on. The worst part of this entire situation was that this wasn't even the first time she had pulled this stunt. Looking back, I realized that approximately every 2 months, Natalie would find some perceived slight or imagined transgression that would justify punishing me with complete silence. These episodes usually lasted anywhere from 2 to 3 days, ending only when I figured out what I had supposedly done wrong, apologized profusely for my imaginary crime, and usually bought her something expensive as a peace offering to make up for whatever offense I had committed. But 7 days? This was setting a new record, and I was starting to realize that she was testing the limits of how far she could push me. The psychological toll was becoming unbearable, and I knew something had to change. By day 3, I was completely done trying to figure out what I had supposedly done wrong. The constant rejection and humiliation were taking their toll on my mental health, and I decided to stop playing her games entirely. I started living as if I was alone in the house, which honestly wasn't that difficult since she was pretending I didn't exist anyway. I cooked my own meals without asking if she wanted anything, slept in the guest bedroom, which turned out to be way more comfortable than I remembered, and generally went about my daily business without trying to engage with her at all. The silence in our house became like this oppressive third person living with us, growing bigger and more suffocating with each passing day, while my patience grew thinner and thinner. One morning, while I was getting ready for work, I caught Natalie watching me from the kitchen doorway. Our eyes met for just a split second before she quickly looked away, but not before I caught something in her expression that made my blood absolutely boil. It was satisfaction. Pure, undisguised satisfaction. She was genuinely enjoying this power play, relishing the control she had over me and testing exactly how far she could push me before I would break. My buddy Eric had texted me to check if we were still on for our weekly gaming session, something we had been doing religiously for years. I hadn't told any of my friends about what was happening at home because it was too embarrassing to admit that my wife was treating me like I was completely invisible. Eric had always been a straight shooter since we've known each other since high school, and he had never particularly liked Natalie. "She's using you, man," he would say whenever the topic came up. I had always defended her and made excuses for her behavior, but deep down I was starting to think he might actually be right. "Everything cool at home?" Eric texted me that evening. "How'd you know something was up?" I replied, genuinely curious how he had picked up on the situation. "You've been online gaming until 2 a.m. every night this week. You only do that when you're avoiding something or stressed out about something major. Plus, Natalie hasn't posted any pictures of you two together in days, just herself shopping and posing with new purchases." I ended up calling Eric and spilling everything to him. The silent treatment, my complete confusion about what had triggered it, and the hurt I was feeling from being treated this way by someone who was supposed to love me. "Dude," he said without hesitation, "that's abuse. Straight up psychological abuse, and you need to recognize it for what it is." I tried to argue weakly, "Come on, it's not like she's hitting me or anything physical." But Eric cut me off immediately. "Emotional abuse is still abuse, man. My sister went through this exact same thing with her ex-husband. It's a control tactic designed to make you feel like you're always walking on eggshells, never knowing what might set them off next. His words hit home harder than I wanted to admit. Walking on eggshells? That phrase described exactly how I'd been feeling for years now, not just during this particular silent treatment episode. Look, Eric continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I don't want to overstep any boundaries here, but I've actually been keeping track of some stuff over the past few months. The patterns in her behavior, the financial drain on your resources, the way she treats you in social situations. I work in risk assessment, remember? It's literally my job to document problematic patterns and identify red flags before they become major issues. And, buddy, he said with a heavy sigh, your marriage is setting off every single red flag in my professional playbook. This isn't normal relationship stuff. This is systematic manipulation designed to break down your self-esteem and keep you under control. That evening, when I got home from work, I noticed several new shopping bags from Nordstrom sitting in the hallway. 4 of them, all clearly expensive based on the size and quality of the bags. Curious and increasingly suspicious, I decided to check our joint bank account to see what kind of damage had been done. She had spent $1,200 in a single afternoon while simultaneously giving me the silent treatment for nearly a week. This discovery absolutely infuriated me more than anything else that had happened during this entire ordeal. What made this even more insulting was the fact that Natalie had quit her social media consulting job about 6 months ago, claiming she needed to find herself and figure out what she really wanted to do with her life. In the month since then, she hadn't found much of anything except new and creative ways to spend my money at the mall. Meanwhile, I was busting my ass working 50+ hours a week, taking on extra projects and overtime shifts just to keep up with her increasingly expensive lifestyle and spending habits. I sat in the guest room that night, laptop open, scrolling through our financial statements from the past year. The picture that emerged wasn't pretty at all. Natalie had spent nearly $43,000 on clothing, makeup, spa treatments, and home decor, items that served no practical purpose other than to feed her materialistic desires. That amount represented more than a third of my entire after-tax income for the year. And what did I have to show for all of this spending? A house full of expensive stuff that I didn't care about, a completely depleted savings account that had taken me years to build up, and a wife who wouldn't even acknowledge my existence. That night, feeling lonelier than I had in years, I found myself scrolling through old contacts on my phone. That's when I saw a name that brought back a flood of memories I hadn't thought about in a long time. Catherine. We had grown up together in the same neighborhood and dated seriously in college before life pulled us in different directions after graduation. She had become a pediatric nurse, always having wanted to help children who were sick and vulnerable. She had this infectious laugh that could make everyone around her smile, even during the most stressful times. Natalie had met Catherine once at my company Christmas party a couple of years ago and had hated her immediately with an intensity that caught me completely off guard. "Stay away from that charity case," she had sneered during the ride home that night, her voice dripping with disdain. "Did you see her shoes? They were probably bought at Target, and that dress looked like something from a discount rack." The venom in her voice when she talked about Catherine had shocked me at the time. But like the good husband I thought I needed to be, I had complied with her wishes and distanced myself from Catherine just to keep the peace in my marriage. As I clicked on Catherine's profile picture, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her and my wife. There was nothing fancy or artificially polished about Catherine's photo, just her in hospital scrubs standing next to a young patient's bed, both of them making goofy faces at the camera. I found myself comparing the two women in my mind. Natalie with her perfectly curated Instagram aesthetic, designer wardrobe, and cold manipulation tactics, versus Catherine with her genuine smile, meaningful career helping sick children, and the natural warmth that I remembered so fondly from our college days together. It made me wonder how I had ended up married to someone who treated me like nothing more than a walking ATM with a pulse, instead of finding a partner who actually valued me as a person. Catherine had actually messaged me a few weeks back when she was passing through town for a medical conference, wanting to grab coffee and catch up on old times. I had politely declined her invitation, claiming I was too busy with work commitments and too worried about potentially upsetting Natalie if she found out I was meeting with an ex-girlfriend. But now, with day 6 of the silent treatment dragging on endlessly and my patience completely exhausted, something fundamental shifted inside me. I felt a spark of defiance that I hadn't experienced in years of marriage. That morning, I had overheard Natalie talking on the phone with Melissa in the kitchen. She was whispering, but not quietly enough to prevent me from catching the gist of their conversation. "He's still trying to figure out what he did wrong," she said, with a giggle that made my stomach turn. "It's honestly hilarious watching him walk around the house looking so confused and desperate. I'll probably make him take me to Cancun to make up for whatever imaginary thing I decide he's guilty of." Then came more giggling, as if psychologically torturing me was the most entertaining thing she had done all week. I stood there in the hallway, completely frozen, as everything suddenly became crystal clear to me. It was like a thick fog had suddenly lifted from my mind, and I could see the situation for exactly what it really was. All those times over the years when I had apologized profusely without even knowing what I was apologizing for. All those expensive makeup gifts I had bought to end these silent treatment episodes. None of it had ever been about me actually making mistakes or doing something wrong. It had always been about Natalie creating manufactured situations where she could extract more from me. More money, more control, more power over every aspect of my life and emotions. During my lunch break that day, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a lawyer. Just for a consultation, I told myself. Just to understand what my options might be if things continued to deteriorate. Washington State operates under equitable distribution laws, the lawyer explained in a calm, professional tone. That means marital assets are divided fairly, but not necessarily equally between both parties. "What about her spending habits?" I asked, thinking about those Nordstrom bags and the $43,000 she had burned through in the past year alone. "She's gone through tens of thousands of dollars on luxury items, while I pay all the household bills and living expenses." The lawyer's response was encouraging. "Document everything you possibly can. Bank statements, credit card bills, text messages discussing finances, receipts for major purchases. If you can prove systematic financial exploitation or deliberate waste of marital assets, it will significantly strengthen your position in any potential divorce proceedings." I thanked him, paid the consultation fee, and walked back to my office with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. It was time to make a decisive move instead of just passively accepting this treatment. The message from Catherine was still sitting there in my inbox, unanswered and waiting. I stared at my phone screen for several long minutes, thinking about 6 days of suffocating silence. 6 days of being treated like I was invisible in my own home. Before I could talk myself out of it or second-guess the decision, I typed, "Still in town for that conference? I'd love to catch up tomorrow night if you're available." The moment I hit send, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, maybe even years. A sense of control over my own life and decisions. If Natalie wanted to give me silence and treat me like I didn't exist, then I would give her something that was actually worth talking about. Catherine's response came back almost immediately, which surprised me with how quickly she replied. "Thomas, yes. I'm here until Sunday and was hoping you'd change your mind. Thought you'd never ask, honestly. How about the Craftsman at 8? They have great mocktails if you're not drinking." I found myself smiling at my phone. A genuine smile that felt weird and unfamiliar on my face after nearly a week of forced emotional neutrality and walking on eggshells around my own house. I glanced toward the living room where Natalie sat on the couch, still scrolling through her phone and still pretending that I was completely invisible to her. She was probably looking at more overpriced items to buy with my hard-earned money. "Perfect," I replied to Catherine. "Looking forward to seeing you again after all this time." I decided to call Eric to fill him in on my plans for the evening. "Just meeting for conversation and catching up," I clarified quickly, not wanting him to get the wrong idea about my intentions. "Nothing shady or inappropriate?" "I didn't say anything was shady," Eric replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice even over the phone. "But listen, while you're out tonight, I could swing by your place. I've been meaning to drop off that gaming headset you wanted to borrow for your setup." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Might be good to have someone document Natalie's reaction when you're actually not home for once, especially if she breaks her silent treatment to ask where you are." I hesitated, considering the implications, then agreed that Eric had a valid point. An objective witness to Natalie's behavior could prove valuable, especially if this situation escalated further. I gave him the code to our garage and told him about the guest house in the back where he could wait unnoticed if necessary. "One more thing," Eric said before we hung up the phone. "Check your email when you get a chance. I sent you something you really need to see before tomorrow night." His tone was serious enough that I knew this wasn't just casual information. When I opened my email later that evening, I found a folder containing dozens of screenshots that made my blood run cold. These were text conversations between Eric and Natalie that I had never seen before. Messages where she complained bitterly about my pathetic salary, despite the fact that I was making six figures. There were conversations where she bragged to him about how easily she could manipulate me into buying her expensive things whenever she wanted them. Even more disturbing were several messages where she had actually flirted with Eric, apparently testing the waters to see how he would respond. Eric had apparently played along just to see exactly how far she would go, and it turned out she was willing to go pretty far. "Been collecting these for a while now," Eric's accompanying note read. "I didn't want to hurt you by showing you these, but you need to see who she really is underneath all the manipulation. This isn't love, Thomas. This is exploitation, plain and simple." I went to bed that night with my mind racing, but my resolve strengthening with each passing hour. Tomorrow would change everything, and I was finally ready to take control of my own life again. I woke up on day 7 of the silent treatment feeling strangely liberated for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun. For the first time in nearly a week, I wasn't bothered by Natalie's childish behavior or desperate to figure out what I had supposedly done wrong. I took a longer shower than usual, shaved more carefully than I had in months, and put on that expensive cologne that Natalie had once criticized as being too much before buying me some generic department store alternative instead. As I buttoned up my nicest shirt in front of the bathroom mirror, I caught myself actually smiling. Tonight wasn't going to be about Natalie's manipulative games anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and self-respect. I checked our joint bank account one more time before heading to work, and sure enough, there was another withdrawal that made my jaw clench. She had spent $350 at some high-end spa, probably getting pampered while simultaneously treating me like garbage. Must be nice to spend someone else's hard-earned money while giving them the psychological torture treatment. Before heading out the door for work, I did something that I should have done a long time ago. I transferred $25,000 from our joint savings account into my personal checking account, just as a precautionary measure. This represented about half of what was left in our savings after Natalie's endless shopping sprees and the ridiculous down payment she had insisted we make on her leased Audi Q5. If she wanted to play financial games, then I was going to start protecting myself accordingly. The day at work turned out to be surprisingly productive. Without the constant anxiety about what kind of mood Natalie would be in when I got home, I found myself focusing better and thinking more clearly than I had in weeks. My boss even commented on the change in my demeanor. "You seem different today, Thomas. More present and engaged than usual." I just nodded and smiled back at him. Personal fog lifting, I guess. Sometimes clarity comes from the most unexpected places. Throughout the day, my phone kept buzzing with messages from Catherine, and each notification sent an unexpected rush of excitement through me that I hadn't felt in years. We reminisced about our college days, shared updates on mutual friends we had lost touch with over the years, and flirted just enough to walk that dangerous line between friendly catching up and something potentially more significant. The conversation flowed so naturally and effortlessly, which was such a stark contrast to the constant eggshell walking I had grown accustomed to in my own home. "Remember that night at Silver Lake?" she texted during my afternoon break. How could I possibly forget? That memory was burned into my mind. Midnight swimming under a brilliant full moon, her silhouette perfectly outlined against the shimmering water, and the way she had kissed me on the wooden dock afterwards with such passion and tenderness. That had been nearly 10 years ago, back before adult responsibilities and mortgage payments, and before I had ever met Natalie. Around midday, I received a text from Eric confirming our plan. "All set for tonight. The garage code works perfectly, and I'll be completely invisible. Won't make a sound." But then I received some completely unexpected news that would change everything. My boss called me into his office to discuss the Chicago position I had applied for several months ago. A significant promotion that came with stock options and a $30,000 salary increase that would substantially improve my financial situation. Natalie had been adamantly against this opportunity when I had first mentioned it to her. "Chicago is so cold and windy," she had complained, without even considering the career benefits. And that's barely any more money when you factor in the cost of living differences. It would be a lot more work for not much additional benefit. What she didn't know, however, was that the position came with stock options that were about to vest, and the company had been performing exceptionally well. Conservative estimates put the total value of these options at around $200,000, a detail I had deliberately kept from Natalie because something in my gut had told me to keep this particular card close to my chest. I'll have my answer for you tomorrow morning, I told my boss, who seemed pleased with my response and the seriousness with which I was considering the opportunity. When I got home that evening, Natalie was in the kitchen making dinner, but obviously just for herself since we were still maintaining this ridiculous charade. I watched her for a moment from the doorway, noting how theatrical and determined her efforts to ignore my presence had become at this point. 7 full days now, an entire week of punishment for a crime I still had absolutely no clue about committing. I walked past her to the bedroom to change clothes for my evening out, and as I selected a nice jacket from my closet, I heard her footsteps pause outside the door. She was watching me, clearly curious about my unexpected preparations for going somewhere. Typically by this point in one of her silent treatment episodes, I would have been on my knees begging for forgiveness, desperate to end the psychological torture and return to some semblance of normalcy. But not today. Today was different, and I could sense that she was beginning to realize that her usual tactics weren't working. My phone chimed with another message from Catherine, and I deliberately left it unlocked on the bed while I finished getting ready, knowing that Natalie could easily see the screen from where she was standing in the doorway. Catherine had sent a selfie from the restaurant, and she looked absolutely stunning in a simple black dress. Nothing flashy or designer about it, but she wore it with a natural confidence that Natalie's expensive outfits never seemed to achieve despite costing 10 times as much. The text message read, "Got here early to snag us a good spot. Can't wait to see you, like old times." When I turned around to grab my wallet from the dresser, Natalie was standing directly in the doorway with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was wearing the $600 loungewear set she had bought just last month, because it was on sale, though I noticed the sale price was still more than most people spend on a week's worth of groceries. I could see all the questions burning in her eyes, along with the visible tension in her jaw as she processed this unexpected development. But still, she maintained her stubborn silence, clinging to the silent treatment as her weapon of choice even as it was clearly becoming less effective by the hour. "Don't wait up," I said casually as I walked past her with a confidence I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The scent of my cologne lingered in the air between us, and I caught a glimpse of her expression in the hallway mirror as I headed toward the front door. There was confusion mixed with the first genuine hints of worry I had seen from her all week. When I arrived at the Craftsman, Catherine was already there, effortlessly holding court at a corner table that offered privacy while still allowing us to enjoy the ambience of the restaurant. Her face absolutely lit up when she saw me walking through the door, and she stood up to embrace me with a hug that lingered just long enough to remind me of the connection we had once shared years ago. "You look amazing," I said truthfully, taking in her appearance. She had this natural glow about her that no amount of expensive makeup or designer clothing could replicate. "You don't look so bad yourself," she replied, her eyes taking me in with obvious appreciation. "Though I have to admit, I'm surprised you actually showed up tonight. Didn't think you had it in you anymore, to be completely honest. The last time I saw you at that Christmas party, you seemed, I don't know, beaten down somehow." The slight challenge in her voice wasn't lost on me, and I knew exactly what she meant. The man she had known and dated in college would never have tolerated being treated the way Natalie had been systematically treating me for years. Somewhere along the way, I had lost myself completely while trying to maintain an impossible peace in my marriage. "People change," I said, taking a seat across from her at the intimate table. "And then sometimes, if they're lucky, they find their way back to who they really are." For the next 2 hours, we talked about everything and nothing, easily falling back into the comfortable rhythm we had shared so many years ago. Catherine told me fascinating stories about her work with sick children, describing her small but cozy apartment that she had decorated herself, and her dreams of maybe opening a wellness clinic someday where she could make an even bigger difference in people's lives. Not once during our entire conversation did she mention designer brands, complain about not having enough material possessions, or express dissatisfaction with her life because it wasn't luxurious enough. It was incredibly refreshing to spend time with someone who actually contributed something meaningful to the world instead of just constantly taking from it without giving anything back. "So what's the real story with you and Natalie?" Catherine finally asked, cutting through the pleasant small talk we had been maintaining. "Your social media shows this picture-perfect couple living the dream, but something's definitely off. I can see it in your eyes. There's a sadness there that wasn't present when we were together in college." I hesitated for a moment, then found myself telling her absolutely everything. The systematic, silent treatments that happened every few months like clockwork. The relentless financial drain that was slowly destroying my savings and peace of mind. And the constant feeling that no matter what I did, I was never quite good enough for Natalie's ever-increasing standards and expectations. Thomas, Catherine said gently, reaching across the table to touch my hand with genuine concern. That's not a marriage. That's captivity, and you need to recognize it for what it really is. My phone started buzzing repeatedly in my pocket, vibrating against my leg with an urgency that was impossible to ignore. I checked it to find 5 messages from Natalie, the first communication I had received from her in an entire week. Where are you? Who are you with? Why aren't you answering your phone? I need you to take me shopping tomorrow for new boots. Hello? The sheer entitlement in that 4th message almost made me laugh out loud. It was so perfectly typical of her behavior patterns. Break the week-long silence not with an apology or explanation, but with an immediate demand for more spending on unnecessary luxury items. I put the phone back in my pocket without responding to a single message. Then I did something completely impulsive that felt both terrifying and liberating at the same time. I took a selfie with Catherine, both of us smiling genuinely at the camera, with my arm around her shoulder and her face close to mine. I posted it to my Instagram account with the caption, "Reconnecting with old friends makes you realize what you've been missing all along." I knew that Natalie followed my Instagram religiously and checked it multiple times throughout the day. "Everything okay?" Catherine asked, noticing the determined expression that had crossed my face as I put my phone away. I smiled, feeling more certain than I had in years about my next move. "Better than okay, actually. But I think it's time we take this conversation somewhere else, if you're willing." She raised an eyebrow with curiosity. "Your place?" I nodded confidently. "Exactly. My place. There's someone there I think you should meet, and I could use a witness to see what I've been dealing with all this time." Catherine hesitated, her expression becoming more serious. "Thomas, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I want you to know that I'm not interested in being part of some revenge scheme against your wife. That's not who I am, and it's not what I want to be involved in. It's not like that at all," I assured her earnestly. I need an objective witness. Someone who can see what I've been dealing with and validate that I'm not crazy for feeling the way I do. Someone who knew me before all of this happened, who can remind me of who I used to be when I had self-respect and boundaries." She studied my face carefully for a long moment, searching for any signs of deception or ulterior motives, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I trust you. But promise me this isn't about trying to make her jealous or hurt her feelings. This needs to be about you gaining clarity and perspective on your situation." "I promise," I said, and I genuinely meant it with every fiber of my being. As we pulled into the driveway of my house, I immediately noticed that all the lights were blazing throughout the entire structure, which was unusual for this time of evening. Natalie's shadow was clearly visible, moving behind the living room curtains, pacing back and forth with obvious agitation. I checked my phone quickly and discovered that I had accumulated 15 missed calls and 27 text messages in just the past hour alone. The silent treatment was clearly over on her end, though I hadn't bothered to respond to a single message. "Ready for this?" Catherine asked, her expression showing a mixture of concern and excitement as she prepared to witness whatever was about to unfold. "More than ready," I replied with conviction, turning off the engine and taking a deep breath. When we walked through the front door together, Natalie was standing in the hallway like a sentinel, her arms crossed tightly over her chest in a defensive posture. The look of absolute shock on her face when she saw Catherine standing beside me was absolutely priceless. Her eyes widened to an almost comical degree, her lips parted in disbelief, and her entire body seemed to freeze as if she had been turned to stone. "Look who I ran into this evening," I said with deliberate casualness, helping Catherine out of her coat with exaggerated politeness. "You remember Catherine from the company Christmas party, right? The nurse with the Target shoes that you commented on so memorably." Catherine raised an eyebrow at this pointed reference, but maintained her composure admirably, saying nothing in response. The large clock on the wall ticked loudly in the sudden silence that filled the space between us. 1 minute passed, then 2 minutes, as Natalie's eyes darted frantically between Catherine and me, and I could practically see the calculations running through her mind as she tried to process this completely unexpected development that had thrown her off balance. 3 full minutes of increasingly strained silence passed before Catherine finally broke the tension with her characteristic warmth and confidence. Catherine smiled with genuine friendliness, seemingly completely unaffected by the obvious tension crackling in the air around us. "Your home is absolutely beautiful, Natalie, though it seems a bit materialistic for my taste. There are so many brand new things everywhere I look." She moved confidently toward the living room, her her heels clicking authoritatively on the expensive hardwood flooring that Natalie had insisted we install last year. "Oh, is this the new restoration hardware collection?" Catherine asked, examining the furniture with the eye of someone who knew quality when she saw it. My hospital director just bought the exact same pieces for her office. She mentioned they cost more than her first car did. 5 minutes had now passed, and Natalie remained frozen like a statue, her silent treatment now seeming less like a deliberate weapon and more like complete paralysis in the face of this unexpected situation. I moved casually to the kitchen, pulling out 3 glasses from the cabinet with deliberate nonchalance. "Water? Juice? Something else to drink?" I called out, knowing exactly what psychological effect I was creating by treating this as a normal social situation. "Water would be perfect, thank you," Catherine answered politely, continuing to examine the bookshelves with obvious interest. "Oh, wow. All these books look completely brand new and unread. Do you actually read any of these, Natalie? Thomas always loved discussing literature when we were in college together. We used to spend hours talking about different authors and their philosophical approaches." 6 minutes into this surreal standoff, Natalie finally followed me into the kitchen, her movements stiff and mechanical. I could feel her eyes boring into my back with laser-like intensity as I filled the glasses with filtered water from our expensive refrigerator system. When I turned around to face her, the fury in her expression was absolutely unmistakable. But still, she maintained her stubborn silence like it was some kind of sacred vow. Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame with the easy confidence of someone who was completely comfortable in any social situation. "You know, I was just telling Thomas about the Children's Hospital fundraiser we're organizing next month. We're trying to raise money for kids with cancer who need specialized treatment that their families can't afford." She paused deliberately, her eyes taking in the obvious luxury surrounding us. "I noticed your impressive designer handbag collection displayed in the hallway when we came in. One of those bags could probably fund an entire child's treatment program and give them a real chance at survival." And that was the moment everything exploded. 6 minutes and 43 seconds to be exact. "What is she doing in our house?" Natalie's voice erupted with volcanic force, breaking her week-long self-imposed silence with such intensity that it made the water glasses vibrate on the counter. The sound was so sudden and violent after the prolonged quiet that it seemed to echo off the walls. I calmly handed Catherine her glass of water before turning to address my wife. "Found your voice rather quickly, didn't you? It's absolutely amazing what 7 full days of silence can do for a person's vocal cords. I was starting to wonder if you had developed some kind of medical condition." Natalie's face flushed a deep crimson color that clashed horribly with her expensive loungewear. "You brought her here? To our home? How dare you disrespect me like this?" I took a deliberate slow sip of my water, maintaining steady eye contact with her over the rim of my glass. "I thought you weren't speaking to me anymore. In fact, I was under the distinct impression that I had somehow become completely invisible to you this past week. It's funny how quickly that situation can change when it suits your purposes." Catherine cleared her throat softly, clearly sensing the escalating tension. "Perhaps I should give you two some privacy to work through whatever this is." "No," I said firmly, not breaking eye contact with Natalie for even a second. "Catherine is my invited guest. She's welcome in this house and she's staying right here." Natalie's eyes narrowed dangerously, and I could see her entire body trembling with barely contained rage. "You know exactly what you're doing right now, Thomas. This is deliberate and calculated." "Do I?" I countered, setting my glass down on the marble countertop with a soft clink. "Because for 7 straight days, I've had absolutely no idea what I supposedly did wrong to deserve this treatment. 7 days of being punished for some mysterious crime that I wasn't even informed I had committed. So please, enlighten me. What exactly am I doing wrong now? I'd love to finally understand the rules of this game we've been playing." The kitchen fell silent again, but this silence was completely different from what we had experienced over the past week. This was charged with confrontation and tension, rather than the passive-aggressive avoidance that had been suffocating our home. Natalie glanced nervously at Catherine, then back at me, and I could see the dawning realization in her eyes that she had completely lost control of her carefully orchestrated power play. For the first time in 7 days, she knew it. "You did this deliberately," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and something that sounded almost like fear. "You brought her here specifically to hurt me and humiliate me in my own home." Catherine continued sipping her water calmly, watching this entire domestic drama unfold with the measured interest of someone observing a fascinating psychological experiment. The confident presence of another woman in our home, especially one that Natalie had explicitly disrespected and demanded I avoid, had accomplished in 7 minutes what I couldn't achieve in 7 full days of trying to break through her wall of silence. I stepped closer to Natalie, lowering my voice to a more intimate level. Hurt you? That's absolutely rich coming from someone who's been psychologically torturing me for an entire week while simultaneously spending my hard-earned money like it was play money. Tell me, Natalie, how does it feel to get just a small taste of your own medicine? You're a pathetic excuse for a husband, Natalie spat venomously, her composure cracking more with each passing second. I expect a full apology for this humiliating display, and I expect it right now. That's when I decided to play my trump card. The piece of evidence I had been saving for exactly the right moment. I pulled out my phone and played the audio recording I had made that very morning of Natalie's conversation with Melissa, where she had bragged about manipulating me into taking her to Cancun and laughed about how hilarious it was to watch me suffer. Her face went from bright red to deathly white in a matter of seconds as she heard her own words played back to her. By the way, I added with complete calm, I've transferred half of our joint savings into my personal account. Consider it compensation for emotional distress and psychological abuse. Oh, and I've already spoken to a divorce lawyer who was very interested to hear about our situation. Turns out that psychological abuse and systematic financial exploitation are things that family courts take pretty seriously these days. Natalie's composure crumbled completely as the full implications of what I was saying hit her like a freight train. You can't divorce me, she stammered desperately, her voice suddenly small and vulnerable. You need me. We're married. We have a life together. Actually, Catherine interjected with clinical precision, from what I can observe here tonight, he's been doing all the heavy lifting in this relationship. Financially, emotionally, and probably in every other way that matters too. Stay out of this, Nurse Ratchet! Natalie snarled, but there was unmistakable panic creeping into her voice now as she realized how quickly her world was falling apart. I smiled with a calmness that surprised even me. One more thing you should probably know. I've accepted that promotion in Chicago. You know, the one you dismissed as being beneath us because it wasn't a big enough salary increase to meet your standards. Turns out it comes with stock options that just vested last week, and they're worth approximately $200,000. Natalie's eyes widened dramatically, and I could practically see the dollar signs reflected in them as she calculated what this meant for her financial future. But here's the thing, I continued, enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. You're not coming with me to Chicago. This house is underwater financially, thanks to your insistence on refinancing it to pay for your endless shopping habits. The cars are leased in my name exclusively. And that prenuptial agreement you thought was just standard legal paperwork? It has very specific clauses about abandonment and psychological abuse that my lawyer found quite interesting. You can't prove anything, she whispered desperately. But her voice lacked any real conviction as the walls continued closing in around her. Eric chose that exact moment to walk through the front door, his timing so perfect it almost seemed choreographed. Actually, he said confidently, holding up a small thumb drive like it was a piece of crucial evidence, he can prove quite a lot. I've been systematically documenting Natalie's spending habits and emotional abuse patterns for the past year, and I have comprehensive records of everything. Plus, I'm a direct witness to this week's silent treatment episode since I've been staying in your guest house all week with Thomas's explicit permission. I heard everything that happened. Natalie looked frantically between the three of us, her face a mask of shock and betrayal as she realized just how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. You've been spying on me? In my own home? This is completely illegal. Our home, I corrected firmly. The home that I pay for while you treat me like a servant and an ATM. And it's not spying when you're being so blatantly obvious about your manipulation tactics. It's just documentation of behavior patterns that were impossible to ignore. Seeing that her aggressive approach was failing spectacularly, she immediately switched tactics with the skill of a seasoned manipulator. Her expression suddenly softened dramatically, and crocodile tears began welling up in her eyes as she transformed into the victim she wanted us to believe she was. Thomas, baby, please, she said in a honey-sweet voice that I had heard countless times before when she wanted something expensive. You're making a huge mistake here. We can work this out between us like adults. I love you so much. I've always loved you more than anything in this world. I shook my head slowly, feeling nothing but relief and clarity for the first time in years. No, Natalie. You've never actually loved me as a person. You loved what I could provide for you financially and materially. There's a fundamental difference between those two things, and I finally understand that now. That's not true at all, she cried, the tears flowing more freely now as she pulled out all the emotional manipulation stops. I was just upset about your parents' visit last weekend. You were on your phone the entire time they were here, completely ignoring everyone and making me look like a bad hostess. I just needed you to understand how hurt and embarrassed that made me feel. I actually laughed out loud. A genuine laugh that felt incredible after a week of tension and confusion. That's what this entire psychological torture session was about? Your parents were here for exactly 6 hours total, and I checked my work emails for maybe 20 minutes because we had a legitimate server emergency that required my immediate attention. And your response to that minor inconvenience was to punish me with an entire week of complete silence? Natalie collapsed dramatically into one of our expensive dining room chairs, the full reality of her situation finally hitting her like a massive truck. Thomas, please, she begged, her voice suddenly soft and vulnerable in a way I had only heard when she wanted something particularly expensive. We can work this out together. I'll change completely. I'll get a real job. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Too little, too late, I said, feeling nothing but relief wash over me. You should pack your essential belongings tonight. You can stay with Melissa while the lawyers sort out all the legal details of our separation. But I have nowhere else to go, she cried. And for the first time, these seemed like genuine tears rather than calculated manipulation. Melissa's apartment is tiny and cramped. All my friends live in small places that aren't suitable for extended stays. I can't live like that after everything we've built together. You should have thought about those consequences before you decided to treat your husband like an ATM with a pulse, Catherine remarked dryly, speaking the truth that everyone in the room was thinking. Natalie tried one final desperate tactic, moving toward me with that calculated, seductive walk she had always used when she wanted to manipulate me into giving her something expensive or getting her way. It was a routine I had seen countless times before, and I was amazed at how transparent it appeared now that I could see it for what it really was. Baby, remember how good we are together, she purred, attempting to use her sexuality as a weapon one last time. No one knows how to please you the way I do. We have something special that you'll never find with anyone else. I stepped back deliberately, maintaining my distance from her manipulative advance. Actually, speaking of that particular topic, I need to thank you for faking it so convincingly for 3 years. Catherine already explained to me that no woman actually makes those specific theatrical sounds during intimate moments unless she's putting on a deliberate performance for some ulterior motive. It had been an eye-opening conversation with Catherine earlier in the evening, one that had revealed just how many aspects of my marriage had been carefully constructed, lies designed to keep me under control. Natalie's jaw dropped open in shock and humiliation as she realized that even her most private manipulations had been exposed and discussed. She looked desperately between Catherine and me, finally understanding that she was completely defeated and that every weapon in her arsenal had been neutralized. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your essential belongings, I said, with complete calm and authority. Eric will supervise the process to make sure you don't take anything that isn't explicitly yours. The joint credit cards have already been canceled, so don't bother trying to use them for any last-minute shopping sprees. The next few weeks turned into a complete whirlwind that changed my life in ways I had never imagined possible. Natalie initially moved in with Melissa, but their living arrangement lasted only 10 days before it exploded spectacularly. She expected me to wait on her hand and foot like I was her personal servant, Melissa complained to mutual friends. She acted like she was doing me a favor by staying there, even though I was letting her live in my space completely rent-free. After Melissa kicked her out, Natalie bounced between various friends' couches, but each stay became progressively shorter than the last as her true entitled nature revealed itself to people who had previously only seen her carefully curated public persona. Without my financial support to cushion her demanding lifestyle and unrealistic expectations, her relationships with even her closest friends began deteriorating rapidly. I filed for divorce with all the comprehensive documentation that Eric had meticulously collected over the past year. My lawyer was genuinely impressed with the thoroughness of our evidence. Most people don't come to me this well prepared, she said, reviewing the detailed records of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and psychological warfare. This level of documentation will significantly streamline the entire legal process and strengthen your position considerably. Natalie hired and fired 3 different lawyers in rapid succession, each one giving her increasingly disappointing news about her prospects in the divorce proceedings. The prenuptial agreement held up perfectly under legal scrutiny, especially when combined with the extensive documentation of her systematic financial waste and calculated emotional abuse. In the end, she received less than 10% of what she had initially demanded, and even that was more than she deserved based on her behavior. The promotion opportunity in Chicago became my lifeline to a completely new beginning. I sold our house at a financial loss, but I genuinely didn't care about the money because the freedom was worth far more than any monetary consideration. I donated most of the expensive furniture that Natalie had insisted on buying with my money, keeping only what could fit comfortably in my reliable old Toyota for the move to my new life. The new job in Chicago turned out to be both challenging and incredibly fulfilling in ways I hadn't experienced in years. This was the kind of meaningful work I had always wanted to pursue, but had been consistently talked out of by Natalie's constant demands for higher income over job satisfaction and personal fulfillment. For the first time in my adult life, I was working because I genuinely enjoyed what I was doing, rather than just grinding away to fund someone else's expensive lifestyle. Catherine and I maintained regular contact throughout the divorce process, but she was wisely careful to maintain appropriate boundaries during this transitional period. "You need time to heal properly," she said, with the wisdom of someone who understood human psychology. "You need to figure out who Thomas really is without Natalie's constant influence and manipulation affecting your decisions and self-perception." She was absolutely right, as usual. I spent the next 6 months focusing entirely on rediscovering myself as an individual rather than as half of a toxic relationship. I started exploring old hobbies that I had abandoned years ago when Natalie had deemed them childish or a waste of time. I began making new friends who valued me for who I actually was rather than what I could provide for them financially. I even started seeing a therapist to better understand how I had fallen into such a destructive relationship pattern and to develop the tools necessary to avoid repeating those mistakes in the future. I joined a local hiking group and discovered that I absolutely loved being outdoors and challenging myself physically. I started playing guitar again after years of neglect, and the muscle memory came back surprisingly quickly. I even enrolled in a woodworking class at a community college, learning to create beautiful, functional objects with my own hands. Slowly but surely, the confident, joyful man I used to be, the one with genuine self-respect and healthy boundaries, began to emerge from the psychological damage that years of manipulation had inflicted. Meanwhile, Natalie's attempts to contact me grew increasingly desperate as her new reality set in, and she realized the full consequences of her actions. The messages followed a predictable pattern that my therapist had warned me about. First came the angry, threatening texts. "You'll regret this decision for the rest of your life." And, "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." Then came the guilt trips designed to make me feel responsible for her situation. "I'm practically homeless because of your selfishness." And, "I never thought you could be so cruel to someone who loved you." And finally came the pathetic attempts at reconciliation. "I miss you so much and think about you every day. I've really changed and learned from my mistakes. Please give me just one more chance to prove that I can be the wife you deserve." The last reliable information I heard about Natalie's situation came through mutual acquaintances who reported that she had taken a job as a receptionist at a car dealership, a significant step down from her previous lifestyle expectations. She was sharing a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with 2 other women, splitting rent 3 ways just to afford basic housing. Her Instagram account still showed her posing with luxury items and maintaining the facade of her expensive lifestyle. But according to people who knew the truth, all of these items were either borrowed from friends or rented specifically for photo opportunities. The carefully constructed illusion was beginning to crack, though. Former friends started leaving comments on her posts, questioning the inconsistencies between her lavish social media presence and the reality of her financial situation that they were hearing about through the gossip network. People began noticing that she would post photos with expensive handbags and jewelry, but then privately complain about having to eat ramen noodles for dinner because she couldn't afford proper groceries. 8 months after my move to Chicago, I decided to invite Catherine for a weekend visit. She had recently accepted a position at Chicago Children's Hospital. A coincidence, she insisted with a smile, though I had my suspicions that there might have been other factors influencing her decision to relocate to the same city where I was building my new life. That weekend turned into regular visits, which eventually led to Catherine relocating to Chicago permanently. We're taking things deliberately slow, building a relationship that's founded on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than manipulation and material expectations. For the first time in years, I'm with someone who values me for who I am as a person. not what I can provide financially or materially. This new relationship feels completely different from my marriage to Natalie. Catherine actually speaks to me when she's upset about something instead of using silence as a psychological weapon designed to punish and control me. We have real conversations about our feelings, our goals, and our concerns. We work through disagreements like adults, rather than one person systematically torturing the other until they submit completely. Last week, Natalie called me from an unknown number that I almost didn't answer. Something told me to hear what she had to say, though I was prepared to hang up immediately if she started with her usual manipulation tactics. "Thomas, please," she sobbed into the phone, her voice sounding genuinely broken and desperate. "I need help, and I don't have anyone else to turn to. My current roommates are kicking me out at the end of the month. I've got nowhere to go and no way to afford anything decent in the city on my receptionist salary. Could you maybe just help me with a security deposit on a new place? Just this once for old time's sake?" I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, not as a form of punishment like she had done to me, but because I wanted to truly consider my response and make sure it came from a place of clarity rather than emotion. "I'm sorry that you're struggling with your housing situation, Natalie," I finally said with genuine sincerity. "But your living arrangements aren't my responsibility anymore, and they haven't been since our divorce was finalized. However, I can email you some links to financial assistance programs and affordable housing options that might be helpful for someone in your situation. But that's absolutely all I can do for you." The silence on her end of the line was deafening and seemed to stretch on forever. Then, in a small voice that was barely above a whisper, she asked, "I really messed up everything, didn't I?" "Yes," I answered with complete honesty. "You did. But that doesn't mean you can't learn from your mistakes and build a better life for yourself going forward." After we hung up, Catherine asked who had called, having overheard part of the conversation from the kitchen where she was preparing dinner for us. When I told her about Natalie's desperate plea for financial help, Catherine just squeezed my hand supportively and said, "You're a good man, Thomas. You handled that situation with more grace and kindness than most people would have shown in your position." You know, I reflected, sometimes the best revenge isn't plotting elaborate schemes to hurt someone who wronged you. Sometimes it's simply walking away from the toxicity, reclaiming your own life and happiness, and finding genuine fulfillment while the person who tried to destroy you has to watch from the sidelines, completely powerless to stop your success. As I think back on everything that happened, I realize that Natalie used 7 days of calculated silence to try to break me down and maintain her psychological control over me. But it only took 7 minutes with Catherine in our kitchen to give me the courage and clarity I needed to break free from that toxic cycle forever. The irony isn't lost on me. The very weapon she thought would destroy my spirit ended up being the catalyst that saved my life and gave me back my self-respect. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to finally find your way back to who you were meant to be. Update. Holy crap. I didn't expect this story to blow up so fast when I first posted it. Thanks for all the overwhelming support and private messages from people sharing their own similar experiences. It's both heartbreaking and reassuring to know that I'm not the only one who has gone through this type of psychological manipulation. To answer some of the most common questions that keep coming up in the comments, yes, the prenuptial agreement was absolutely solid and held up perfectly in court. My lawyer had included very specific clauses about financial waste and emotional abuse that proved to be incredibly valuable during the divorce proceedings. If you're getting married, please don't skip this step. It can save you years of legal headaches and financial devastation. No, I don't feel even slightly bad about how things ended with Natalie. Years of systematic psychological manipulation and financial exploitation were more than enough. I gave that relationship everything I had, and she chose to take advantage of my kindness instead of appreciating it. For those asking if Catherine and I have made things official yet, yes, as of last month, we're in an exclusive, committed relationship. We're taking things at a pace that feels natural and healthy for both of us, which is such a refreshing change from the constant drama and manipulation I lived with for years. And no, I haven't heard a single word from Natalie since that last desperate phone call where she begged for money. I'm perfectly fine with maintaining that complete silence forever. Some bridges are meant to be burned completely, and this is definitely one of them. The most important thing I've learned from this entire experience is that I deserved so much better treatment than what I had accepted as normal. For anyone reading this who recognizes similar patterns in their own relationship, you deserve better too. Don't let anyone convince you that psychological abuse is acceptable just because it doesn't leave visible bruises. When I finally realized that I deserved to be treated with basic human respect and dignity, Everything else fell into place. The courage to leave, the strength to rebuild, and eventually the ability to find real love with someone who actually values me as a person rather than as a source of income. Looking back now, I can honestly say that discovering my own worth was the most liberating experience of my entire adult life. It's incredible how much better life becomes when you stop accepting treatment that you would never tolerate someone inflicting on your best friend. The silent treatment that was supposed to break me down and force me back into submission ended up being the exact catalyst I needed to break free and reclaim my life. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have possibly happened. You just don't realize it at the time. Freedom from psychological abuse feels like breathing fresh air for the first time after being trapped underground for years. If you're in a similar situation, please know that there is a way out. And life on the other side is so much better than you can possibly imagine while you're still trapped in the cycle of manipulation and control. Edit. For those asking about resources, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233, isn't just for physical abuse. They have trained counselors who understand psychological and emotional abuse patterns too. They helped me understand that what I was experiencing was actually abuse, not just relationship problems. Thanks again for all the support. It means more than you know to have strangers on the internet validate that my experience was real and that my decision to leave was the right one.